when we gather in Addis Ababa, a city emblematic of both historical richness and dynamic modernization, that we're reminded at this critical juncture at which our urban environments and how they stand in the face of climate change. And to address this critical juncture today, we delve into three pivotal themes that are, I think, not only relevant to Ethiopia, but also resonate to the broader narrative of sustainable urban development in an era of environmental uncertainty. We will commence with, yes, Dr. Shivani Wadehra's presentation on Addis Ababa's solid waste management. And waste management is an effective cornerstone of resilient urban living, impacting everything from public health to environmental sustainability. And in Ethiopia, with this sort of rapid urbanization as a vivid reality, I think thinking about these pioneering waste management strategies are essential, not just for the cleanliness of our cities, but also as a mean of reducing greenhouse gases, and of course, in Addis Ababa's pioneering case, to generate electricity as well. After Dr. Shivani, we will explore the role and potential of urban agriculture with the insights of Dr. Dawit Mulatu and Dr. Jemal Ahmed. I think it's interesting as Ethiopia navigates the challenges of climate change, urban agriculture emerges as this potential solution. It's not just about food security, but there are these secondary benefits as well around reducing urban heat islands, enhancing biodiversity, as well as creating green spaces for the mental and physical well-being of citizens. And I think this research is particularly pertinent as we reimagine our urban spaces. And then lastly, Dr. Marlon Seror will speak to us on migrants and city growth. And again, migration is a powerful driver of urbanization. And in Ethiopia, where diverse communities converge in cities, understanding these dynamics, both how climate shocks and stresses kind of increase risk to migration, but also these pull and push factors, how they affect citizen choices of where they locate. This is vital in shaping resilient cities that are prepared for the challenges of climate change. So with that, I congratulate the IGC Ethiopia team in the running order, as I think each of these presentations, sheds a light on a different aspect of urban resilience. And it reminds us that creating resilient cities are not just about withstanding these climatic shocks, but also creating cities that work. So that's my little monologue beginning. Onto the formalities. We have an hour or slightly less, and we have three presentations. So I've been asked to ensure 15 minutes for questions and answers, and I'm particularly fond of engaging the people in the room. So I think we're going to leave that at the end, and I'll also try and incorporate a little bit of time for some key take-home messages from each panelist and for me to close. Now, working backwards, we have about 15 minutes for each presentation, which I believe everyone has been told. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker, disappear off video, and then I'll pop up again with sort of 13 to 14 minutes. And hopefully you can kind of start wrapping up, or you already will be. So I hope that is okay. I will stop there and we will begin proceedings with Dr. Shivani. Shivani, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Oliver. Right. So I hope my screen is visible. Right. So I am going to talk about the waste management system in Addis Ababa, what are the gaps, and our proposed research. So this is still work that would begin. This is my collaborator is Zihan Nai from Beijing Normal University. Just to introduce myself, I'm an assistant professor at UPES, University of Petroleum and Energy Studies in Dehradun, India. So I've done a few other studies in India and in Bangladesh on waste segregation. So this is where my background is, and let's begin. So before I begin on the current waste scenario, current waste management system in Addis, I wanted to inform that we interviewed a lot of stakeholders, right, ranging from Addis Ababa Administration and Cleansing Management Agency to Environmental Protection Agency, UN Habitat Ethiopia, Deputy Mayor of Addis Ababa, and the Urban Environmental Unit and officials at Urban Environmental Unit, the Civil Services University in Addis. So the current scenario when we look at waste management in Addis is the city generates 2,400 tons to 3,000 tons of municipal solid waste on a daily basis. 76% of this municipal solid waste is generated by households. Now let's look at the composition of this waste. So 70% of this waste is organic, 15% is recyclable waste, and the rest is inert, which means the rest 15% is inert. And it is this inert waste which should go into a landfill. So moving forward, let's come to the collection and payment mechanism. So this waste is collected from households by small and micro enterprises, which the municipal authority has contracted this collection system to these small and micro enterprises. How do households pay for this solid waste collection? Is that households pay 20% of their water bill for solid waste collection. That's their fee for solid waste to be collected by these small and micro enterprises. And in the case of businesses, businesses pay 42.5% of their water bill directly to the municipal authorities. And the municipal authorities then basically pay these small and micro enterprises. Right. So what are the gaps in this present system of collection and payment? So as you've now noticed that the waste generation and the collection fee for solid waste is actually not dependent on the amount of waste that is generated. It is dependent on the amount of water that is consumed by businesses or by households. So this obviously creates a potential mismatch between a funding source and the expenditure that the city has on collection. Now, next, the small and micro enterprises are then paid by the municipal authorities on the basis of the total waste that is collected by them. So here, once again, the small and micro enterprises also do not have any incentive in reducing the waste that is collected by them. So by reducing here, I mean that ensuring waste that is recyclable should go to maybe someone who can recycle. So they do not have that incentive. And also we've already seen, since for households, the fee that they pay is dependent on the water bill and not on the amount of waste generated. There is absolutely no incentive at the household level to reduce the amount of waste that they generate. Right? So given these two, neither the households nor do the collection, which is the small and micro enterprises, both of them do not have any incentive to reduce or to ensure that waste is segregated at the household level and then collected, segregated by these SMEs. Next, just give me a sec. So our interviews with these stakeholders also highlighted issues such as lack of awareness of households on benefits of segregation for environment, lack of incentive or penalty for segregation, erratic collection timing, lack of an infrastructure to ensure segregated waste is not mixed by collectors as some of the main challenges that are faced by solid waste management, that are faced in the field of solid waste management in the city. So now let's come to processing. So government actually processing, by processing, I mean here that maybe organic waste can be composted or it can be used in a biogas. So government actually does provide a subsidy of 3 birr per kg in order for this compost to be taken up. And lastly, coming to disposal, in 2018, a waste-to-energy plant was set up in the city with a capacity of 1,400 tons, and it was set up to handle all of city's waste. So as you can see, 2,400 tons is the waste that is generated in the city, and 1,400 tons is the capacity of this waste-to-energy plant. So basically about 1,000 to 1,500 tons is going to be dumped in the city's landfill. Now, what are the gaps when we come to processing and disposal? Clearly, government is providing a subsidy in order for compost to be taken up. But the the uptake of this compost is low because there is no composition of the compost is not listed. Hence, nobody knows what the NPK values of this compost are. Finally, at the WTE level, so we've already gone through the composition of waste, cities waste, that is 70% of it is organic, i.e. it is low calorific value waste, and hence the plant runs only at 1/4 of its capacity. So if hypothetically, I think that let's only send the high calorific value waste to the plant, i.e. the recyclable waste to the waste to energy plant, then given the amount of waste that is being generated, the recyclable waste is not going to be sufficient to run this plant. Right? So what are we going to, so what are our research objectives in the study? So like I said, this is a proposed research design. So we will look at evaluating the feasibility and effectiveness of the current waste billing system to understand and to design a more financially sustainable waste management system in the city, examine suitable ways to promote waste segregation at source among urban households, and explore how better household waste segregation could benefit the downstream waste treatment process. So before I go on further, it's really important for us to understand why waste segregation. So as you, so waste, once households are segregating waste as source, the organic waste can be composted. So the organic waste is no longer contaminated by the inorganics or the recyclables. And once the organic is separate from the recyclables also are not contaminated by the organic, obviously. And hence, the cost of cleaning or recycling these recyclable waste is lesser, right? So that's why we are looking at examining suitable ways of promoting waste segregation at source among the urban households. How will we go about this? So we will rely on secondary data, and we will also run an experiment. So for the secondary data, we will rely on variables such as water bills, consumption and expenditure data, organic waste data, which we will collect from these cooperatives, and compare it with the present waste generation data at the sub-city levels to understand which of these variables is actually a good proxy for waste generation in Addis. We will also look at households' subjective perceptions of the current waste of the current billing system and elicit their willingness to pay for waste collection to evaluate the financial perspective. So this will be done using primary data. So now moving on to the research design, to the experiment bit. So we will design interventions on from both the supply side and demand side of waste management. On the demand side, we will implement household campaigns that will increase awareness and knowledge. And in addition of the households, and in addition to this information campaign, we will also provide households with dustbins and periodical reminders to segregate their waste. So moving on to the supply side, which is collection. So we will provide households with a collection service, which will ensure that waste that is segregated at the household level is not mixed by all the effort by the householder.
I'm not sure if that's just me that's losing Shivani, but is the room also struggling with her audio? Okay. I think we might be struggling with some of Shivani's audio there. Let me see. She might potentially come back, but I know I think she was coming towards the end of her research design. So I don't necessarily want to wait in case there isn't in case she still struggles, but we can perhaps come back at the end of the session when Shivani reconnects. But I think I will just speak briefly on some of the things that I found quite interesting from that, because I think, you know, this understanding that over 3/4 of waste generated by households is quite a lot, I found. I think that's more than I thought was going to be the case in terms of a municipal or a city's waste, right? I think this question around the payment related to the water bill is very interesting as well. I know a lot of cities do this, either some are related to electricity, but there are, of course, some it's a clever solution, but how well does this proxy waste generation is an interesting question, and where are these incentives related to that? What kind of incentives do people have to reduce their waste if it doesn't really matter how much they're paying compared to how much their waste generation is? And I also find this certification of compost. Shivani's back. This certification of compost. Shivani, I was just sharing some of my key takeaways from what we did manage to get from you. But I think this certification of compost and how we view the quality of compost is particularly interesting, particularly as when it relates to urban agriculture, right? Because I think there'll be some aspects of urban agriculture that might be willing to take kind of uncertified compost. But if you are growing some quite high value products, you're going to want to know the chemical understanding of your compost, right? To make sure that what you are creating has enough quality. Shivani, do you mind can you go to maybe your last or some kind of concluding slides to make sure we try and stay on time? Is that possible?
Sure.
Thank you.
So, yeah, so I am on the last slide.
Okay, good.
So the data that we would collect would be obviously on whether the household is segregating or not, weight of segregated waste or mixed waste. So in case the waste is segregated, then we collect information on both organic and inorganic waste. So this collection of this information of organic waste will also give us an insight into the amount of compost that can be supplied from the cities, and thus would help in designing markets for compost and moving towards circularity. Within the experiment, we will collect information on consistency and persistence of households to segregate. So a part of the study is to design a more financially sustainable collection mechanism. So we will collect information on the cost of providing the segregated collection service as well as the interventions, and also evaluate the welfare impact of this collection service and intervention on the households. So lastly, we will also take advantage of the 3 studies that have been conducted in the Indian subcontinent and draw these parallels with Ethiopia. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shivani. Yeah, very interesting indeed. And during your slight internet cutoff, I gave some of my kind of thoughts on some of those key messages and key takeaways. So I won't do that again, but what I will do again is just the segue from compost to urban agriculture, because I think there's a useful connection there, right? How are we going to provide the soil and the adequate kind of soil for urban agriculture, and what does urban agriculture look like in cities? So I believe I'm handing over to Dr. Dawud Mulatu and Dr. Jemal Ahmed, who are in the room. We'll move from the virtual floor to the physical floor, and please take up the stage for your discussion on urban agriculture. And again, similar kind of protocol, I'll pop up around the 13-14 minute mark. And we can hopefully begin to wrap up there. But I'm very looking forward to hearing what you have to say on this matter. So I'll leave it there and hand over the floor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I think I would like to thank the IGC for giving us the opportunity to present our work on urban agriculture. Basically, this is an exploratory study, and more of is a preliminary finding. And I know it's very difficult to be the first speaker after lunch, so I hope it will be, a bit entertaining compared to the virtual session. So this work is done by myself from Addis Ababa University, Dr. Dawit from Policy Study Institute, and Isaiwat from Ethiopian Technical University. So as I said, this is a preliminary finding. Okay, so this is the outline of my presentation. So I'll give a little bit of background, followed by the methods we use to collect and data and to analyze the data, and then followed by the results and discussion. And after that, we'll try to highlight what are the challenges and opportunities regarding urban agriculture in the city, and then followed by conclusion and finally the way forward. So, so as you know, African population is growing. African urban population is growing very fast and expected to reach about 56% by 2050. And in 2014, it was 40%. So you can see how the urban population is growing in African cities. So obviously, feeding the growing urban population will be very challenging in these major African cities. And urban agriculture has been one of the major economic activities with regard to, providing, access to food. Just to give some example, like, for example, about 30% of households in Nairobi benefit from urban agricultural practices, and about 65% of the vegetable supply was coming from agricultural practices in Kampala during the COVID lockdown. And, urban agriculture contribute 60% of the informal sector, and is also the second employment creator in Dar es Salaam. And in Addis, there is a study by Yellow which estimated that the contribution of urban agriculture to the city's GDP is about 1.3%. This shows how urban agriculture is important in different African cities. However, the importance of urban agriculture has increased recently due to different reasons. For example, like global conflicts like the Ukraine-Russia conflict has threatened the food supply system of the world, and that has aggravated especially the food security situation in many developing countries. We have the issue of climate change. We have, the pandemics like COVID, which has also challenged the supply system. And this has, again, increased the importance of urban agriculture. And in Ethiopia, also there is high interest. As you can see, the picture on the left, on the right, is the Prime Minister visiting one of the urban agriculture, the vertical farming centers in the city. So which shows that the role that's given by the government. However, despite the recent, increase in urban agriculture, in the interest in urban agriculture, there are no much studies, trying to document and the role and potential of urban agriculture. So our study is mainly to increase our understanding about the role and potential of urban agriculture by considering Addis Ababa as an example. Of course, this is, as I said, this is more of an exploratory study. And from the finding of this study, we try to develop, a much bigger proposal. We try to investigate deeper into the roles and potential of urban agriculture. So the methods we applied are basically we try to collect both primary and secondary sources. Using primary and secondary sources, we have conducted a number of key informant interviews with, for example, Minister of Agriculture, the Addis Ababa City Farmers and Urban Agriculture Development Commission, and many other stakeholders. We have also conducted field visits like urban agricultural sites, including individuals that are practicing urban agriculture. We visited schools that practice urban agriculture. For example, we have visited the Wadehra school. We have also, we have institutes and urban agriculture demonstration and input multiplication sites. So, for example, if you go to some ministries, for example, it's common now to see, urban agricultural practices within the compound of those ministries. So we also try to, consult secondary sources. So these are mainly the basic source of information. And of course, this is also a work in progress, and the comments we'll get will further improve our findings. So coming to the results and discussion. So we try to identify, the first thing we try to do is we try to identify stakeholders in urban agriculture. So we noticed that there are a number of stakeholders within urban agriculture. And as you can see, the table on the right, I think, I don't know whether it's visible very well, I'm not sure. But anyways, there are a number of actors. For example, the first one is Farmers and Urban Agriculture Development Commission. The second one is Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Water and Energy. The list goes down. And we try also to identify what are the major roles of these stakeholders in relation to urban agriculture. So basically the key roles are like providing inputs and technical support is one of the roles. Capacity building, trainings, providing loan, for example, for enterprises, they provide loan, working space, and they also conduct, monitoring activities. There, demonstration sites and research outputs, they also try to come up with new approach in the demonstration sites. But we also noticed that there is limited coordination and interaction among the stakeholders, obviously, because as you can see, the list is many and there is poor coordination among the different stakeholders. So the other issue we try to identify is who are the practitioners of urban agriculture. So we try to, categorize them into four. So the first one is farm households. There are still thousands of farm households within the boundary of the city that are mainly practicing, farming. And we also try to see the activities they perform. So the farm households mainly, cultivate crops. Then after the harvesting the crops, some of them, they try to cultivate, vegetables. And the other group is like, there are also organized groups, for example, organized youth, organized women, and people living with HIV are also, they are organized and they are provided with some support. And the major activities practiced by the organized group are like, they practice fattening, they practice also dairy and poultry production, honey production, and of course, vegetable production are the major activities practiced by the organized group. There are also households that practice urban agriculture at their backyard or homesteads. So these are another group of urban agriculture practitioners. And mainly they focus on vegetable production, poultry and dairy production. These are the major activities practiced by households. And as I said earlier, there are institutional practitioners like, for example, schools, hospitals, and different government organizations are also now joining, the practice of urban agriculture. And mostly they produce vegetables in their compound. And when you see the role of the activities, so for the first two groups, for farm households and organized groups, urban agriculture is the main source of income, whereas for the latter two is a supplementary activity or a supplementary source of income. That's for households and institutional practitioners of urban agriculture. So the other is we try to see the role of urban agriculture. So we try to see its role in terms of food security, price stabilization, employment creation, and its role in terms of environmental management in general. So as you can see, the table on the right and the table at the bottom shows the contribution of urban agriculture in terms of cereal, pulses, oilseed, and vegetable production in the city. And the last table shows dairy, meat, and poultry production within the city, covering different period of time. And we also noticed from the interviews we have that institutional practitioners, provide products of urban agriculture at a lower price, especially, different government organizations, they provide vegetables and other urban agricultural products at lower price to their employees and the surrounding community at lower price. But, the scale is unknown. So how significant is this one is, something that has to be further investigated. In terms of employment creation, we also try to, ask, people at the Farmers and Urban Agricultural Development Commission of the city, the role of urban agriculture in terms of job opportunity creation. For example, the Animal and Fodder Production Unit has reported that about 13,000 individuals have been employed in urban agriculture in the period between 2020 and 22, whereas the Crop Development Unit of the same office reported that about 20,000 individuals are employed under the crop development section. So the problem is, the data is scattered, so we don't have organized data. So that requires, that's why the initial, coordination interaction is very important. Even if it's an old study, there was a study by CSA which shows that the role of urban agriculture in employment creation is about 3%, when you consider the total employment creation in the city. With regard to, environmental improvement, mostly urban agriculture uses organic fertilizer, which is mainly a decomposed waste. So it can be, complemented with waste management activities. It also follows, a nature positive approach because in addition to producing, providing different agricultural products, it creates urban greenery and urban beautification. So this has to be also considered, when we talk about the importance of urban agriculture. So when you see the challenge and opportunities, so the major challenge is obviously there is a competitive demand for land. So, in almost all cities, there is high demand for land. It's very competitive. So it's very difficult to, clearly slot land for urban agriculture. So this is one of the major challenge both in Addis and elsewhere. The other is,
am I coming through? Just to say, if you could begin to wrap up after this slide so we can get the next presentation and have some questions, that'd be much appreciated.
Okay.
Thank you.
So the next is lack of water, and the water is polluted, and the opportunity is, there is better recognition and organizational structure because previously it was under Ministry of Trade and Industry, but now is organized as a commission. So this shows how important the importance given to urban agriculture. So the conclusion is urban agriculture aligns with other government initiatives such as the Green Legacy Initiative. And ምግባችን ከደጃችን የሌማት ትሩፋት are some of the initiatives which can complement urban agriculture. It creates great role employment creation and of course empowering women, of course. You know, there are large number of women participants in urban agriculture. It plays great role in food and supply, and it also urban agriculture is practiced in an area where land is at a premium. So innovation is very important. Always we have to come up with new ways of practicing urban agriculture. Just before we wrap up, to focus on the wrap up or the way forward, there should be a clear allocation of demand. There should be a clear allocation of land for urban agricultural practices. I think we can integrate urban agriculture with, urban planning, for example. There are greenery areas in urban planning, so we can, associate that one with urban agricultural practices. Providing technical support is very important because we have noticed that there is gap in capacity. As I said earlier, stakeholder, knowledge sharing platform is very important, and data repository mechanism should be established because data is very scarce and scattered, so that has to be, corrected. And of course, a rigorous study on urban agriculture to better inform decision making is very important because, we believe that urban agriculture is very important, but there is high competition for land. So it has to be studied whether the current land use for agriculture is optimal in the longer run or is a transitory process. And whether there are ways to make it sustainable, the urban agriculture in the long run. I think one way could be to integrate urban agriculture with urban planning practices. Thank you very much.
Thank you as well. That was very interesting. I think that's a great ending up point, whether this is something that is a long-term solution or is it a solution on resilience, right? And I think that's my big question, my big, or something that's always something in my mind with urban agriculture. There is this role for resilience. As you explained, over the COVID lockdown, we saw 65% of vegetables supplied from urban agriculture in Kampala. I mean, that's a huge amount of its food source. When supply lines struggle, we see these resilient cities fall on their resilient kind of fundamentals. But what is this long-term role for employment? It's quite a large stock of jobs with urban agriculture, but there's not so much growth, perhaps, as I think you show. There's a large stock in Dar es Salaam, but not a huge amount of growth in jobs. And when we're thinking about sustainable growth with this conference, what is the role for it there? And I think, there's also this role of organization, as you spoke about. Cities that work, the initiative I'm part of, have this policy brief looking at urban agriculture and asking whether it is a productive land use for cities and how to harness the benefits of urban agriculture without disrupting the core purpose of a city, which is density and connectivity. So how do we organize urban agriculture in that way? And I implore anyone who's interested in this theme to go and have a look at that policy brief. So turning to you, Marlon, Dr. Marlon, as we saw, urban agriculture can be a major economic sector with respect to informal jobs, but maybe less so with employment creation. And I think often those informal jobs are the ones that migrants might perhaps go to first when they're moving to cities. I've read some evidence about that. So that's my kind of segue onto you from urban agriculture to migration. With that, please tell us about migration and city growth. And again, I'll pop up at the around 13-minute mark, and hopefully the floor, Zenashore, you'll allow us, since we started 5 or so minutes late, we can have a bit of time into the break for some questions if people are interested. But I'll leave the floor with you now, Dr. Marlon.
Thank you very much, Oliver, for the introduction. Thank you all for being here and for organizing this exciting workshop. In the next 15 minutes or less, I'm going to tell you a little bit about an ongoing project about migrants and city growth. This is joint work with my colleagues Simon Franklin, Clément Habert, and Yandel Zilberberg. I'm Marlon Seror. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Quebec in Montreal, Canada. Now, the starting point of this project is that Ethiopia, like many other developing countries, is facing increasing risks that will cause more migration. And one main reason for that is climate change, of course. And unfortunately, Ethiopia is highly vulnerable to climate change. There are a number of factors behind this, ranging from a high reliance on rain-fed agriculture and natural resources, proneness to droughts, floods, high rainfall variability, and already rising temperatures. You can see it here in black for the last few decades, and you'll see that under the business as usual scenario of climate change, this is going to get much worse. And also, unfortunately, a history of internal conflicts that have already displaced more than 5 million people in 2021 alone. And that may be exacerbated by climate change. There's a whole literature showing that the higher vulnerability to climate change, the greater shocks to agricultural productions in developing countries is very likely to create more internal conflict. So because of all those risk factors, Ethiopia, like other, and maybe more than other developing countries, is likely to face large internal migrant flows in the next decades. Now, it's important to plan for that, and the goal of this project, or the main idea behind this project, is to look back to plan forward. So to use data, in particular census data, to measure past and current trends in internal migration, to understand migration patterns, and therefore design the right policies to make the most out of those migrations. So understanding migration patterns is vital at different horizons. First, in the short run, it's important to know where people are going to emigrate from when they face a shock, for instance, due to climate change, and where they will migrate to for emergency relief. And in the medium to long run, it's important to plan cities to provide the right services in the right places, and more generally, social programs. This will enable Ethiopia to maximize the benefits of migration for migrants themselves, of course, but also for sending and receiving areas. So more specifically, the questions that we're going to ask in this project are, first, which cities will grow and by how much when different areas of Ethiopia are hit by different types of shocks? And then where within cities, for instance, in which neighborhoods within Addis will migrants locate? So where will services be needed? So in order to do that, we propose to use the rich data sets from the Ethiopian Statistical Service, in particular census and intercensus survey data, to study historical migration patterns within Ethiopia. And this will allow us to do three main things. It will allow us first to predict future migration flows within and across regions and between urban and rural areas. And second, it will allow us to understand the effects of past migration episodes on the size and transformation of cities, and therefore we will know what to expect when cities face an influx of immigrants in the future. And finally, it will allow us to understand the effects of migration on the living standards of existing residents of cities. I apologize if there's some background noise. Unfortunately, I was not able to make it to Addis in person. So this project is still very preliminary, not least because of data access issue that I'll come back to toward the end of the presentation. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is give you a few key facts about internal migration in Ethiopia. The first key fact is that internal migration in Ethiopia is on the rise. If you look at the census data that we have available, so here I'm using census and intercensus survey data between 1984 and 2012, we see that the number of internal migrants has more than doubled. In 2012, the overall migration rate in Ethiopia was about 17%. This is defined at the Wadehra level. You can also see using census data, I could do it for 1984, but there's some data cleaning to be done here, is that most migrants come from rural areas. And this, of course, reflects the fact that the bulk of the Ethiopian population is still in rural areas. So this gives you already some sense of dynamics, but let's be a bit more specific with this graph, where I'm using the data between 1994 and 2012, and I'm normalizing population and the number of migrants in 1994 to 1. So everybody starts at 1 in 1994, and then we see how much it grows between 1994 and 2012. If you look at populations, the overall population of Ethiopia, which is this reddish solid line here, you see that over this period, it grew by about 50%. Now, let's look at the number of internal migrants. So I plotted this for people coming from urban areas or rural areas, but the pattern is broadly the same. You see that it almost doubled over the same period. So really internal migration is increasing at a much faster pace than overall population over the period. And there is some sign of acceleration in migration from rural origins toward the end of the period. Interestingly, I don't know what you had in mind. I thought that all migrants fled to Addis Ababa, maybe because, of course, a large share of the population of Addis has some migration background. But actually, if you plot this as the lighter lines here, for Addis, you see that migration to Addis is increasing much less steeply than migration to other parts of Ethiopia, and even than population as a whole. So where do migrants go to in Ethiopia? So here, I'm giving you, I'm breaking it down first by origin. So here, those 4 bars show you the breakdown of migrants from rural places of origin. And here you have urban origin migrants. And I'm looking at at the type of destinations that migrants go to. Do they go to rural areas or urban areas? So it's orange versus purple. And do they stay within the same region as the darker bars, or do they cross a regional boundaries, the lighter bars here? So the main takeaway here is that most migrants move to rural areas. This is particularly true for rural origin migrants. Almost half of them go to another rural area. It's also true, largely true for urban origin migrants, which might be a bit more surprising. There's a bit more work to do here, as it could reflect urban sprawl and the fact that the urban rural status in the census might lag behind suburbanization in actuality. So what I'm planning to do here is to use satellite data to tell these two patterns apart. The other main pattern is that most migrants move within the same region. So you see that the darker bars are much taller than the lighter bars. This is particularly true of rural migrants. They tend to go to to another rural area within the same region. It's a bit less true of urban migrants. When they go to another urban area, they tend to cross regional boundaries quite a lot. A bit more mobility here. Now let's focus on those purple bars. Let's split up those urban destinations for both rural, again on the left, and urban origin migrants on the right. So here I'm going to consider 3 types of cities. Addis Ababa is the darker purple bars here. The largest cities and regions, so think of the regional capitals, is the lighter purple bars. And then I'm looking at all other cities, so smaller towns within regions. And each time I'm splitting those bars between within the region or outside the region. The first thing that stands out here is that most migrants head for smaller towns within their regions of origin. So those are the turquoise bars here. And this is potentially of concern because smaller towns may have little absorptive and management capacity because they can offer fewer productive jobs to immigrants, and they might not have the infrastructure or the administrative capacity to welcome those immigrants. So here it suggests that there's probably a lot of strain on migrant destinations. The next most popular destination is Addis Ababa, as the darker purple bars here. You see that about 20% of migrants, both from rural and urban origins, go to Addis Ababa. Conversely, the largest cities and regions seem relatively unattractive to migrants. You see that those bars are the smallest. And this is a bit surprising in a way, as you could think that those large secondary cities could be valuable, worthwhile destinations for immigrants. And this is probably somewhere, an area where policy might have a role to play. For some reason, migrants are constrained or do not have the incentives to go to those places. And so they either go to Addis Ababa, that might be already quite congested, or to smaller towns where they don't have so many opportunities. Let's dig a little deeper into those destinations and see where migrants are concentrated. So here what I did is that I plotted the immigrant share, so this is for 2007 at the zone level, against log density. And what you can see here is a striking U-shape. So the places that have the highest share of immigrants in their population tend to be either densely populated zones, so think Addis Ababa as this orange dot here, I don't know if you can see it well, or places that conversely are extremely sparsely populated. So either rural areas or very small urban areas in sparsely populated zones. So these two modes here in densely and sparsely populated areas might reflect different shocks, different migration patterns. Maybe the migrants who end up in Addis and those who end up in rural areas or very small towns face different shocks, different constraints, different incentives. So it's going to be very important to look into those different shocks that drive different migration episodes. The beauty of the Ethiopian data, and this is very rare in developing country cities, is that we can go at a much finer, much more granular level. So when you look at origins, the most precise you can look at is the zone level. But when you look at destinations, you can look at Kebele, And you could even look at enumeration areas, but here I plotted each dot is a Qabile. Here I separated rural Qabiles on the left and urban Qabiles on the right. And again, it's the immigration share against population density. What's quite striking here is that you have a clear negative relationships between those two variables. So it means that migrants, there tends to be more migrants in Qabiles that are less densely populated. This is true for sure in rural areas. Also, although the gradient is less clear in urban areas, and even if you look at those orange dots here within Addis. And this coming from an urban economics background like myself and probably many people in the room, this is quite surprising because you would expect migrants to go to more densely populated areas just because of agglomeration economies, right? More densely populated areas are probably areas that are more productive, that can sustain already a higher population, that have more job opportunities. So this suggests that maybe migrants are not going to the right places in Ethiopia. And that's something we would like to understand better in order to devise the right policies. Before I tell you about the next steps for this project, let me map emigration and immigration rates in Ethiopia to give you an idea of the potential importance of shocks. Here on the left, I'm mapping emigration rates by zones of origin in 2007. And here on the right, you have the immigration rates by zone of destination. And I'm going to show you 2012 in the next slide. So what you see here is that in 2007, the zones with the highest emigration rates were in the north and the southwest, and immigrants tended to concentrate in Addis Ababa, the Rift Valley, and the west. Now take a mental picture of this and compare it to 2012. See, the picture is very different. Now those maps are only 5 years apart, but you can see that in 2012, the spatial distribution of immigration rate was very different, which suggests that maybe shocks, could be conflicts, could be droughts, and so on, have a big effect on population movements in Ethiopia. So what are the next steps? So I've been doubling down on the importance of understanding shocks to model migration patterns. So the next step for us is to collect data on various shocks, both push factors at the origin level, like high temperatures, extreme weather events, low rainfall that we can get mostly from satellite imagery. We can also use internal conflicts here, and pull factors at the destination level, for instance, labor demand from the manufacturing sector. Once we have those various shocks, we need to combine them with migration episodes to understand which shocks explain what migration episodes. And for that, we need to observe three things. We need to observe the migrant's destination, which is quite easy. It's the place where they live. That's always available. The migrant's origin, which is less commonly available, but it is available in most Ethiopian census data, and the timing of migration. Once we have that, origin and timing, we can link migration episodes to shocks and therefore model them and model the allocation of migrants within cities. Once we have that, we can finally measure the effects of migration residents on cities and therefore devise the right policies. So by way of conclusion, I want to highlight a data challenge that we're encountering in this project. So I told you that to predict migrant flows, we need information about migrants' origin. In theory, that's available in particular in the 2007 census, which is the most recent and comprehensive data that we have for Ethiopia. However, information on migrants' zones of origin is missing for three very important destinations. It's missing for Addis Ababa, Dehradun, and Harar. And that means that for those destinations, I cannot study origin level shocks, and thus I cannot understand migration patterns and predict them. So those data are supposed to have been collected according to the questionnaire and statistical reports. It's just that according to the report, they were not ready when the data were publicized. So I understand that Ethiopian Christmas was not so long ago. So if I can still add something to my Ethiopian Christmas wish list is to get access to those data. Even if they're in paper format, we can find resources to digitize them and get the information that we need. A lot of resources were invested in collecting those data. And so it's really a pity that we cannot have a comprehensive view of migration to design the right policies for to handle the rising migration that's to come in Ethiopia. So thank you very much for your attention. You can contact me at this email address if you have more questions. I'm looking forward to the Q&A and B't'ama basaganano.
Thank you very much, Marlon. That was very interesting. Particularly this role of choice, right? Whether it is active choice or whether it is forced from climate change. I think these migration patterns look very different, and I think that also kind of began to show by some of that very interesting movement of people from either to the big conurbation of Addis or to these small towns. And what does this mean for sustainable growth, right? Because there's different evidence around of the ability for big cities to absorb migrants versus smaller towns. And they have kind of different consequences for their ability to absorb, to provide jobs, to take on jobs. And also exactly these questions around administrative capacity and public services. Are these going to be able to be provided at these different levels? Because of course there's restrictions in Addis, and these are very different restrictions to some of the small towns in Ethiopia. So I did promise some questions and answers, and I know we're slightly at time, but with the technical issue and starting 5 or so minutes late, I hope you'll allow me to eat 5 minutes into your break for questions. Dr. Shivani can stay. I think it's 7 a.m. with Dr. Marlon, so I assume that he can stay as well. And I wasn't sure if it was Dr. Jemal or Dr. Jawed who presented. I think it was Dr. Jemal, but hopefully you can stay as well. So what I will do is I will take one round of questions, maybe 3 questions from the floor. Then I'll do an official wrap up of the session, and of course you can go on and have some coffee and a little break. But if there are other questions, those in the room are welcome to ask some more, and then I'll do kind of an unofficial close after that as well, depending on how many questions we get. So yes, I think I might need some help for this, Zenashore, if possible. If there are questions, I have prepared some, but I won't share them because I think that would be yeah, I want to hear from those in the room first, and I will stop talking there. I'm quite comfortable with silence. You know, as you teach students, you have to become more comfortable with the silence after you ask if there are any questions, and it's even easier when you're doing this virtually. So I'll just ask if there are any in the audience, and yeah, please share any that you do have. And I assume there's a roaming microphone, and Zenashore or Teddy, you can help me out.
Sure. So I'm his technical assistant. You may raise your hands. I think given that we have 2 papers lined up in the last technical session, I think we can borrow some 10-15 minutes. So you can ask your questions. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we can go around and yeah. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, for this chance. And thank you also for the presentation. As the presenters, I have like few questions on the urban agriculture as well as the migration. On the urban agriculture, the presenter raised the questions like the shortage of land, the water is already polluted, all those problems are there. But the suggestion probably is like including the urban agriculture into urban planning. But the issue is like in urban centers, the land is highly productive. Like instead of allocating this land for urban agriculture, why don't we allocate the land for, say, more productive sector? For example, manufacturing or construction for that matter, so that you may get more return from that land, which is already scarce. And you can buy the livestock product, whatever agricultural product from other part. So I think like the opportunity cost of allocating land for urban agriculture is probably very high. So I need a comment on that. And the similar question also here, like we have big cities especially in Asia. How do they address this urban agriculture, the issue of urban agriculture? Do they have really the urban agriculture from which we learn more? How do they address the issue of this creating more employment opportunity, income source, and livelihood source in general using this urban agriculture? So this country experience as well as opportunity cost of land that should be taken into account. That is one. My first 2 questions on the migration we have. That is a very interesting topic because it is the real issue in our country. And we have, like in Ethiopia, we have these days the large influx of especially using other type of citizen from rural area into urban areas. So my question is, like, given lack of employment opportunity already in urban centers, in housing, in a basic service, do you think that this rural-urban migration is a burden or opportunity for the cities in the country, like in Addis? Is it, my question is it an opportunity or a burden? That is my first question. The other question is, like, those are serious push factors that push people from rural area to urban, like the climate change, for example, the droughts, the flood, and of course the serious issue these days, the conflict we have. So people are like migrating to urban center to save their life. So I don't know how. What do you suggest, like, to address those factors that probably push instead of the pull factor? I think obvious thing is the push factor. So how do you deal with those factors, especially in the climate issue? And finally, like in the past, of course, migrations are there in different parts of the world. So how do they benefit from those rural-urban migration, and what Ethiopia learns from the past experience? Thank you.
Aragga.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions for the last presenter. Actually, one of my questions already taken by the previous individual. Dear presenter, please, I want you to react on these issues. If your research addressed those issues, let you have a brief. If not, you can skip them. As a previous individual asked you, there are push and pull factors for the rural-urban migration. So if you address those issues, which one takes the right-hand side or the significant share in the process of migration, the push factors or the pull factors? So if the push factors dominate, how can you recommend? And if the other is true, the case, what could be your recommendation to enhance the push or the pull factors? The other issue is regarding the livelihood change. I don't know whether your research addressed this issue or not, but it was already mentioned in your objective. It's one of your objective to see the livelihood change for the migrants and for the city. So how do you get, or what is your recommendation, or what's your finding regarding the livelihood change of the migrants? One last issue, what is your view and recommendation? Do you support that rural-urban migration is good or bad for the country? My institution, Ethiopian Economics Association, had one research for Oromia regional state of Ethiopia, and we come up with conclusions that rural-urban migration should be appreciated if some precondition or conditions could be fulfilled. And we do have this recommendation that we support the rural-urban migration if these preconditions are fulfilled. If not, the rural-urban migration may be problematic for the region. This was our recommendation. What is yours? Thank you.
There and there.
All right, good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. Thank you. I have, for the three presenters, have one question. On the urban agriculture, the land case was raised again and again to allocate land. So that without allocation of land, one cannot have that agriculture. So from definition, even to start with the types of crops or vegetables or what kinds of things are allowed from a health point of view to be cultivated within the city center, We have to start from that definition, and at the same time, the designation of land is important. So for whatever reason, those lands are not going to be designated, the concept and the policy and the implementation of the urban agriculture will be in question. So I really wonder how these things are going to be integrated, because I'm mindful that most of the urban agriculture in Addis Ababa happens on the peripheries of the rivers. And this, for the agricultures, that's polluted water is used for the urban agriculture. Eventually, it's going to go to the household of whoever is going to buy those vegetables. So with a city which has less than 25% of sewer waste management, most of the sewer goes into the river or the underground system of the negative Z of the city. So I'm really mindful, and I want the presenters to reflect, but at the same time to suggest what are the mitigations in those areas, because the scale is going to be an issue. On the waste management, once again, just like the liquid waste goes into the rivers, a significant amount of solid waste also goes into the rivers. So the rivers are, and also the stormwater systems of the city, which are much higher than the sewer line systems of the city. I'm referring to Addis Ababa for clarity purposes. They use the stormwater systems, and eventually they go to the rivers. So this relationship, which is quite bad, how is the waste management thinking will incorporate this fact? This is a very big fact. Other studies have already shown that, and I really wonder how the presenters are going to, or the study is going to accommodate these issues. The last one is on the migrants in the city growth. I am mindful and concerned that most of these references are in 2012. In the past 11 years, a lot has happened. And through that, if we don't qualify the starting point, I think collecting the data might skew the end result. And I am concerned that the end result might not be achieved in mitigating these issues. Just to give this number, last year, the government official stated that 10 years ago, we had 1,000 cities. And today, we have 2,500 cities. And in the coming 10 years, in the coming 9 years, we are going to have 5,000 cities. Mind you, defining a city in our context is like a city with X number of residents, but more than 50% of the residents get their income out of agriculture. So through this line, this rate of urbanization and scale is quite big. And I also noticed that conflicts and internal displaced citizens are not somehow considered in the presentation. So it would be interesting to know how this is going to be incorporated, especially urbanization is not only urban pull, there is also a rural push, not from climate point of view, but from service and infrastructure point of view. So I would like to have that reflected. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. My question is kind of a follow-up to what Mahader was saying, but specifically to the third presenter on cities and migrants. On the map that he was showing us, it only shows parts of Ethiopia and not including the eastern part of Ethiopia. The Somali region alone, especially since a long time ago, has been the most prominent one in terms of addressing the issue of internal displacement. Currently, it is assumed that nearly 1 million IDPs live within Somali region alone. So that's quite a significant number out of the 5 million that we currently think are IDPs within this country. And then from 2020, start of the conflict in the north, we all know that the number of IDP numbers has gone way up. So when I see those graphs and then the generalization of these internally displaced people, whether preferring to live in cities or out of cities, I think it is a bit dangerous because it's very context specific. We know the science, there are always push and pull factors. But when you go really down to not only Warada level, but to community level, the kind of reasons that they give you are so varied that you would be shocked. If I mention our experience of currently working on 9 IDP sites, I can tell you that it's not actually necessarily what the people want or what conditions allow, but what is available really that is driving the choice of these internally displaced people to either stay in the IDP camps or to stay near where there is an urban center. So I just want to highlight that the dangers of, generalizing not only for Ethiopian migrants or Ethiopian IDPs, but even at the regional level or even at way down to community level is really risky. Yeah, that's all.
Thank you very much. Back to you, Oliver. I'm also mindful of the time. We are going slightly over time, but
Sure.
you might want to give each presenter 3 minutes each to address some of these issues.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's the best way to proceed, my wonderful technical assistant. So yeah, please, maybe in reverse order to the way we have presented, just pick the questions that you feel, confident with. Don't feel you don't have to necessarily answer those where you'd be reaching, but at least let the audience know that, there might not be enough data or such like that. But yeah, I think there were amazing questions from the audience, and clearly the presentations have provoked good responses, but I feel if we answer them all, we might be going far too into the break. So we'll start with you, Dr. Marlon, then we'll head back into the room, and then we'll end with Shivani, and then I will close. I think that's okay.
Thank you very much for all those questions. It's amazing to get such a great feedback. So please don't hesitate to send me an email if I don't have time to answer your question, or if you have other thoughts that come up. So quite a few questions were related to each other. So let me try to make one big answer. So I had quite a few questions about, whether rural to urban migration is a good thing or not. And my view is that migration raises both challenges and opportunities. And what is key is that we want migrants to get to where they would be the most productive. So on the opportunity side, you have structural transformation. All the countries that have developed have gone through an era of massive internal migration from rural to urban areas. That's allowed them to develop, to become more industrialized, and so on. Because this is what allows better allocation of the labor force. You have lots of people who are in rural areas where they're not very productive, and they would be much more productive in another sector, in other part of the country. And also, as it creates urbanization, it creates agglomeration economies, again, enhancing productivity. Now, it's true there are lots of challenges. So there's a big literature in development economics about urban unemployment from massive rural migration to cities. Migration creates congestion. Someone mentioned lack of housing and employment opportunities. That's all true. It also creates lower wages for some non-migrant residents in destination cities. But the flip side of that is, of course, that it creates lower labor costs for firms. So there are opportunities there too. So I think the key thing is really that you want migrants to go where they're the most productive. And based on the very preliminary evidence that I've shown you based on census data in Ethiopia, it's not clear that this is what is happening. So there's room there for policy. The second big question that I got was about how the data are a bit old, and I completely sympathize with you. I also have National Labor Force Survey data, which allows me to go all the way to 2021, I think, to look at more recent trends. But it's very important to use the census data because it gives you a comprehensive mapping of migration flows, and this is what allows you to model the allocation of migrants across space. Then you can take that model to more recent data, but that's why I really need census data. And the last question that I had that I would like to tackle briefly is this issue of choice versus not a choice. Like, especially when you're a refugee, do you really choose where you go to? So to some extent, of course, you do not. You just go where you can and where you would survive. However, there are still very strong economic forces that determine where migrants go. even if they're refugees. And one such force is gravity. Like it's just costlier to go somewhere farther away. So people tend to go not too far in the same region or where there is a refugee camp available. And that's where policy has a role to play. If you can make it less costly for migrants to go where they are the most needed, where firms need workers, where they could be employed productively, then that means that you can design a policy that would make a big difference for migrants, but also for the country.
Great. Thank you very much. And yes, back to the room. If we can maybe tackle your top two questions, either around the shortage of land and how to link urban agriculture with urban planning and the productivity of land and these kind of opportunity costs, urban agriculture in Asia, or I think there was a question around, again, the kind of vegetables that are allowed, but also the pollution around urban agriculture taking place on the periphery and of rivers and pollution. So yeah, if you could maybe tackle two of those, and then we'll end with Shivani and our close. And hopefully that's okay timing-wise for you, Zenishal.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thank you. I think thank you for the very important questions. I think the issue of allocating land for urban agriculture, has been, a question since we start, drafting the proposal. But I think the issue is, for example, in the city, we have, large unutilized land. And, when we see the level of development in Addis and in other, for example, in cities where we have, efficient utilization of land, or like where there is proper land allocation and management, maybe, urban agriculture may not be that much attractive. But even with that context, in major cities, they are still trying to promote and practice urban agriculture. But in the context of Ethiopia, I think there is still large land which is unutilized. And that's why we ask, when I finish my presentation, it's very important to, analyze or further investigate whether, practicing urban agriculture in the city is sustainable in the long term, or is just a transitory, practice that has to be investigated. So we don't have, clear evidence on that, given the level of development of the city and given the issue of land allocation and utilization in the city. So that's one thing that has to be investigated and supported by data and rigorous analysis. I think the second question is related to health issues. Yeah, unfortunately, I think this also emanates from, because as I said, in case of, for example, Dar es Salaam is considered as an informal sector. Even in Addis, there is lots of informality when you consider the practice of urban agriculture in the city. When most of those practicing in riversides, are more mainly in the form of, informal urban agriculture practicing. But if there is a clear, rule and regulation and clear allocation of land for urban agriculture, the issue of pollution and other health risks can be considered. So that's one of the issues that has to be considered. I think I also said that, it's very important to integrate urban agriculture with urban planning, because I think the urban planning is like 40, 30, 30, 40 is for settlement, 30% is for greenery, and 30% is for, I don't know, for service or something like that. So we can integrate urban agriculture with the green land allocation approach of urban planning development. But that has to be, first, further investigated with proper data and analysis, whether urban agriculture is a feasible approach from different perspectives. Like, for example, in terms of livelihood, in terms of waste management, in terms of its environmental impact. So that has to be established. And then after that, once we have the evidence, we can come up with a concrete recommendation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jemal. I think that's, the big call for evidence is something, of course, the IGC are very keen on and very keen to implement. So Shivani, quickly, this very quick question about, waste management and rivers, if possible, in a brief moment, and then I'll, wrap up in a minute.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Oliver. And thank you for this very interesting question. Oftentimes, yes, this is a very pertinent issue when it comes to waste management, and illegal dumping or waste going into stormwater drains is often one of the causes of urban flooding as well. So yes, thank you for this very important question. I would just like to point that at least in the case of Addis, and municipal solid waste, since we see 76% of this waste is being generated by households. So if we can get these households to not dump their waste illegally, we can sort the bigger problem, the bigger portion of this problem of illegal dumping. And this, I believe, can be sorted once our collections service is more regular. Once if it's erratic, you do not know whether your waste collector is going to come or not. And that is when you go around dumping it in a drain, in some points that our cities end up having. So once our collection system is more regular, it's more, the timing, that is when most of this problem would get sorted. Thank you. That's all that I need to say on that.
Great. Thank you very much, Shivani. That is much appreciated. Okay, I will wrap up now. I started by greeting everyone and the urban enthusiasts in the room, and I think I'm fairly sure it's only the urban enthusiasts who are left. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone, for staying with us. I'm not going to do any concluding messages, but I think we've clearly opened up a lot of interesting questions. I think the speakers are all very willing for you to follow up with them. And as Dr. Jemal said, this is the start of some new evidence on resilient cities in Ethiopia. And I think it's an exciting time to bring more data and theory to these very important policy relevant questions and an important aspect of how we balance this environmental uncertainty, resilience with economic growth, right? And I think these are things that can connect through together, but we need some well-informed and well thought through policy design to do so. So I think all that is left for me to do is to thank the presenters, thank yourselves as an audience for your engagement and applause, thank IGC Ethiopia and the Ministry of Planning and Development as well for putting this together, and of course to thank myself for a chair. And thanks Zeneshore more particularly for helping out in the floor. That was, resilient cities, and up next I think is a well-deserved break for you. So thank you. Amesaganallahu, and
thank you very much, Oliver, for the nice sharing. What we will do is to mitigate the time. I think let's just use 15 minutes, and also we'll borrow 15 minutes from the next technical session.